today. I'm looking forward to it. Stephen, thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Sure thing. Well, tell us a little bit about your personal background, and then obviously we want to get into your business and what you guys do.
Personal background. I am an Iowa and Minnesota native. And, I spent most of my time in the Midwest. In the 4 years where I should have been going to college at the University of Iowa, I moved to San Francisco and New York City and Washington, D.C. and Chicago, and spent a lot of time seeing how the other half lives, and finally graduated with a really bizarre degree and went to Chicago and was one of the early employees at a mutual fund rating company called Morningstar, where I learned how like business works, and got to see a really cool startup flourish, and spun out a startup called Gorilla, which was a software company, and ran that for about 10 years before I sold it, moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, and kind of hit reset, where I am today, focused on digital transformation and the customer experience side of transformation. So that's a little bit of background. Today, just focused on helping companies of all sizes work their way through the planning and execution of customer experience transformations.
Okay, that's great. I appreciate that background, especially the idea of should have spent in college for those 4 years. I feel like even the time I spent in college, I should have spent more of that time in college. We can relate on those grounds. So tell me about your business a little bit. We always want to hear about the problems that our guests solve, right? So every business is like this, as you well know. There's a problem that your customers are currently experiencing, and entrepreneurs, they create problem solving solutions and they get paid for it. So what is the problem that you saw and you set out to address?
Well, the problem that we originally set out to address has kind of morphed a little bit, and our ability to adapt has been what has sort of made the difference. But we set out to help people solve culture change issues, and figure out how to make an axis shift inside the organization so that they can focus more on digital, focus more on adopting a publishing mindset and using enterprise content, using marketing assets at the highest level to help kind of liberate their story. And about 10 years ago, we were doing this for a couple really big companies, and it turned out that they wanted to focus a lot more on the customer experience side of things. So the transformations went from, your traditional digital transformation to customer experience transformation. And we were embedded in a couple organizations like IBM and GE, and, having really interesting conversations about how you make a meaningful axis shift inside organizations that size, and how do you get cultures, how do you build coalitions of the willing to help shape cultures so that they can increase customer centricity. And so we sort of morphed into a CX consultancy over the course of the past decade. And what's come out of that is we've been collecting like MBAs, people with change management backgrounds who understand organizational development and understand sort of the underlying management and cultural dynamics in change, so that we could help these organizations see around corners and make the necessary shifts. So today we're just a practice of consultants who are helping organizations figure out, if you want measurable output from increasing your level of customer centricity, or deeper employee engagement, what does that look like? How do you do it? How do you measure it? How do you govern? How do you put in governance structures so it doesn't backslide to the status quo? So that's essentially the problem that we solve.
Okay, I love that. And so, are there a specific type of, I guess, industry focus or type of business that you focus on?
Yeah, I love that question, and it's an odd question. I mean, it's an odd answer to a very smart question. There are an abundance of CX consultants out there now. We know that marketing agencies, advertising agencies, consultancies, the big four, everybody is kind of shifted, grabbed a new paddle and have started canoeing up this CX stream. So a lot of people focus on what CX Pilots calls consumer, commodity, or volumetric CX, which means they're not trying to foster long-term relationships of note with a few companies. They're trying to sell an enormous amount of product to as many people as they possibly can. So their CX mechanisms and machinery is really focused on selling commodity and trying to drive friction out of maximum commodity sales. That's CX to a lot of people. We focus completely in a different direction. We focus on professional services. It's a dramatically underserved marketplace. So if you are an accounting firm, if you are an architect or a legal firm or a big engineering firm, you have relationships that are 7-8-figure relationships. And if you screw up those relationships, you can see one flawed relationship on your bottom line. If you're selling, if you're Amazon and one customer's pissed and jets for some reason, it's impossible to see that in the larger scheme of things. So CX focused on professional services is to us is a lot more challenging. It's a lot more complex. It requires a lot more. These companies are typically pretty insular, and there's just a lot of challenges. And so we've retrofitted our consulting approach to address the needs of those professional services firms.
Okay, so I'm gonna throw a question at you, and this is, forgive my lack of knowledge of the industry. This may be an elementary question, but in those two examples that you gave, right, and the Amazons, right, or a large, we'll say, logistically based, monstrous business versus a professional services firm, to fix those types of relational problems on the Amazon example, that's more of a process improvement and potentially a technology and a logistics improvement, a support improvement, whereas the professional services, it would seem as if you're dealing more with people and improving. Sure, there's a process component to that, but it's about the process by which people behave and interact with other people. Is that fair? Is that a right assessment?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that was ignorant at all. I mean, you're exactly right. So it's not without process and technology. I mean, those play huge enabling roles in the overall solution. However, you're exactly right. So we're talking about relationships. So if you go to the front of the CX Pilots website, you're going to see huge words that say relationship design tools. So what the hell are relationship design tools? It's a term that we coined quite a while back. We help these professional services firms understand a lot more about the relationship, which sounds really, and we've actually received this feedback directly. It sounds kind of almost arrogant to walk into someone who's, a firm that's had clients for 85 years, and then a fledgling firm comes in and says, we're going to teach you how to sustain more meaningful and profitable relationships. They're like, who the hell are you to tell me? Turns out that a lot of these firms are unwittingly conflating customer service with client experience.
I talk about this all the time. Yeah, those are not the same. That's right.
Those are not the same. And so when we're able to cut through and help people understand the differences, and we say, if we can create an MRI and we can put every one of your client relationships through this MRI, and it points to like 11 or 16 or 27 different possible trouble spots, and we're able to show you why they're trouble spots, and we're able to help you address them collaboratively, then that's the difference maker. So relationship design tools are, we've developed these fairly sophisticated proprietary tools that act just like an X-ray or an MRI to help people understand all the different interactions that their clients have in these professional firm settings, and then give them a platform upon which they can either remove friction, more closely scrutinize those moments of truth in the relationship, or identify competitively differentiated innovation opportunities. So a way to dramatically improve a way that you onboard a new client if you're a law firm or an architecture firm, in a way that's memorable. So we use an abundance of psychology and behavioral economics to understand things like peak end theory, which is a really cool theory that says that people don't remember everything about their experience. They essentially remember the peak, and then they remember the sort of the thing that happened last. So if you're a professional services company and you're focused on the client experience, as you should, there's a lot of relationship tools that we bring to bear to help people kind of hack the experience so that people have a measurably more positive and fruitful set of interactions or exchanges with their lawyer or accountant or architect or doctor or IT integrator.
I got you. So, and I'm really fascinated about, you called it the peak end theory. So I was going to finish your sentence by saying they remember the peak, the best experience, and the worst experience, but that's not what you're saying, is it? They remember the best and the last experience, which that is a paradigm shift, because I know a lot of businesses and a lot of business leaders, I think it's obvious that you should try to make the best part of their experience good, right? I think that goes without saying, but I don't think we give enough credence to and enough attention to not just limiting their worst experience, but their last experience. So that is really fascinating. So folks, if you're listening to this, or if you're watching this, I want you to think about that in your own businesses, and don't just think about the best and the worst or the average experience, but think about how you can heighten the best experience and make sure that the last experience, and you could probably fill in the blanks here, Stephen, but I mean, I'm thinking about everything from restaurants to the way real estate agents handle closing day, all the way to SaaS companies and how they do their customer onboarding once they've signed on. I mean, there's so many applications of this that not only have to do with making sure that experience is good, but the real practical, or the real rubber meets the road here, is that's going to affect things like your retention rate, churn, your customer loyalty, lifetime value of each customer. I mean, all those things are going to be really dramatically impacted by especially that end experience. So that's really useful. I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. I'm gonna have to go dig deeper into that.
Yeah, I recommend looking at peak end theory. I mean, it's a really important concept in the work that we do, and I mean that's one of 50 or 75 different concepts that are equally mind blowing when you get into this process. So imagine applying peak end theory to not just a generic flow of experiences or relationships that you have, but imagine if you, I mean, everybody's familiar with um, customer journey mapping. I mean, that's to us, customer journey mapping it's fairly critical, but it's really tip of the iceberg type of stuff. If you go into deeper interaction mapping, which is basically just it's you go from the molecular level down to the atomic level, and interaction mapping is just like one more level deep. And one of the things that we love to do when we start working with some of these organizations, our clients, when we start journey mapping, we like to ask the room, do a round robin, like how many interactions would you say you probably have with the typical client over the course of a project or a matter, or whatever the customer is coming to purchase from you? And the answers are always like 25, I don't know, 30. There's always a wild card person in the room. It's like, shit, I think it's 70. Turns out the average is closer to like 380. When we get in there and we actually start mapping these things, like if you go to the Jiffy Lube, and the Jiffy Lube people have material, they've really focused on figuring out what this process is. There's like 200 interactions in one visit to Jiffy Lube. Nobody on earth would ever understand that there are 200 different things that are happening, but there's so many things that happen before you get there, while you're there, and then after you leave. So the way that we look at it, or the way we train our clients to look at it, is if you really want to maximize what you get out of the process of CX, you have to look at, I'm going to introduce two concepts. So the first concept is upstream, midstream, and downstream effect. So upstream is before that person pulls into a Jiffy Lube. There's like 75 things that they can manipulate or take advantage of. Midstream is you've pulled into the shop, now you're there, you're waiting, or you're talking to someone. And then downstream, like there's all the stuff that happens after you drive away. So in the professional services setting, like if you're going to visit an attorney, there's the same things apply. There's upstream stuff, there's midstream stuff, and there's downstream stuff that you need to be concerned about. So that's one thing. I want to put another layer on top of that. So while you're focused on upstream, midstream, and downstream effects of a journey, also think about there's an early stage, there's a middle stage, and then there's a late stage CX. So given that there's a timeline that your client or your customer goes through, there's also ways to chunk this work up into more manageable pieces, make it more modular, so that so your brain doesn't explode when you try to figure it out, or when CX Pilots comes in and lays down like, okay, here's the way to get 100% certainty on a return on your investment for the CX work. And it's complex. We've strived to make it simple, but there's just so much stuff that is so valuable. It maximizes the output of this work like you wouldn't believe. But what's happening is most people read about CX and then they just go the low-hanging fruit route, and they do one or two things, and then they walk away with this really bad taste in their mouth because they didn't get what they were looking for. Well, it's because they didn't think about the holistic kind of the total ecosystem of CX management, which is really unfortunate, but I guess that's the way it is.
So I can tell it's a complex field, right? Just by the sheer number or the sheer amount of theory that one must apply. Two, and I shouldn't have said complex. I should have said it's a difficult. It's probably, I mean, I imagine not a difficult sell in terms of you being able to close business, but a difficult sell when you put down in front of a client, hey, these are the 346 interactions you have with a customer. That's just a lot to take in, right? Especially because as I was thinking about it for myself when you said that, and my first thought was, I don't know, maybe 6 or 12 on a monthly basis or something like that, because that's when I have meetings with them. But then I started thinking about, okay, we're talking about emails back and forth, Slack messages, if we see each other in person, and then all the things leading up. And there's a bit of an overwhelm there. So what do you do? And I think this is broadly applicable to other folks who are dealing on a consultative basis with their clients, right? What do you do to be able to deliver some pretty heavy information in a way that doesn't cause them to freeze, that still enables them to act on the information that you're giving them?
So we learned from studying the way that doctors, specifically like radiologists, deliver information. So it turns out that when you have something complex to share with someone, and it might not be really super positive news, but it's good news in the fact that you can help them solve a problem that they might not know they have. When a radiologist delivers a piece of concerning information to someone, the whole thing is compassion and simplicity. So we would never, walk in the beginning of a relationship with one of our clients and say, guess what? You have 380 things to focus on. Plus you have to figure out how to think upstream, downstream, and not just midstream. And guess what? It's even more complex than that. You have to chunk it up into all these, like, that's just mind blowing. What we do is say,
good luck,
hey,
and give them a high five.
we learned from like how radiologists like study information and deliver information to people. You say, hey, there's after running this test, this is how we ran the test, this is what the test revealed, this is something that is these are things that concern us, and here's why it concerns us, and here's 2 different ways that we would recommend addressing these. Then it's a contained piece of information that people can focus on. And then you allow them to open the aperture based on their level of comfort. So when we do like a CX readiness or maturity assessment, it finds all kinds of stuff. We're looking at 15 different dimensions of CX management. We're saying, hey, you have issues with your culture in Austin and Georgia and New York City and Seattle, but your Minneapolis and your Detroit and your Louisville offices are perfect. So don't spend your resources on training people in those Midwest areas. Focus on these other places that the assessment said where there's a problem. And they're like, oh wow, thank you, you just saved me $500,000. That's the type of stuff that we try to do. Keep it simple, and then just kind of slowly release the information as people are able to digest it. Otherwise, we've learned from mistakes. We've delivered too much information too fast, and it froze our clients up, and it wasn't a pretty scenario. So we had to sort of pull back and learn from other professionals about how they do stuff that can be kind of complex and confusing.
Okay, so I'm really, really impressed by the reaching across to a totally different, field, and studying the way that they deliver complex information. I know that that's actually a great value that I have derived from this interview series, is being able to pull nuggets of wisdom and tactics from people in totally disparate industries that I can steal from my own. So I want to pivot a little bit. Focus of this, this interview series it's called Growth Secrets, right? So we really want to know how other businesses are getting new business. So what's the process that you guys are using to get new customers?
So we're very allegiant to the process of content and we're trying to like fly above thought leadership. It's my theory that a vast majority of, and I'll put thought leadership in air quotes, is actually just thought membership. And everybody's kind of saying the same thing about stuff. They might feel a little frisky one day and put a couple alternate synonyms in for a couple terms, but I don't
Drop
think
an
you get
F-bomb
anywhere.
here and there to sound edgy.
Yeah, I'm trying really hard not to do that right now. But the what we try to do is basically, think about, look at more stuff and think about it harder. So what is it about, I'm really on a jag right now. I'm really interested in, what we call the dynamics of learning relationships. And there are just absolute geniuses who forged this field, 15 years ago, like Don Peppers and Martha Rogers. They were writing about learning relationships and client experience, before anybody really thought about this. And there were people like Valerie Peck who were mapping client and customer relationships like so many years, like over a decade ago. These people wrote so much amazing stuff, and nobody seems to be reading that and spending any time deconstructing it for today's, how the stuff has evolved and adapted. The notion of learning relationships, like and how value truly gets exchanged when you want to learn about your customer and your customer wants to learn about you. Like, imagine the scenario where your customer actually wants to learn more about you. That's phenomenal. Like, it doesn't happen. Why? Because we don't say anything that's worth, all the predominant mindset for, an agency owner or, people that do some of the stuff that you and I do is sales, 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 growth, 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 sales, growth. Instead of like, can you blow someone's mind? Like, can you put a piece of information in front of someone that materially and measurably changes the way they think about something? That's what gets me out of bed. I like to think about things and try to apply them to people's business in ways that changes the way they think about their business. I couple that with the fact that the reason why we're doing what we're doing at CX Pilots is because we know when we're able to do our best work, we can help that firm be the very best version of itself. That's a big deal to us.
So that is, and just broadly speaking, as a consulting firm, right? That should be the goal, right? Is to help your customers be the best version of themselves. And I know I'm boiling what you guys do down to something very high level. I agree very much with your critique of the thought leader as a term. I can't stand the term because it became so, ubiquitous and everyone was a thought leader that now no one is a thought leader, right? If everyone is, no one is by definition. And I think the reason that that definition as you described it makes that term so elusive is because what you just described doing is really hard, right? That doesn't just take content creation efforts. That takes real thinking and research and study, and not just researching and studying and then regurgitating, but but reimagining how that theory might be applied to a specific scenario, in this case, when it's in the context of marketing, in your ideal customer's context. That is hard work. And to the same end, or I guess to that same point, that's going to affect a reader, a viewer, a listener to a far greater degree. Like, it's not a magnitude of, what do they say? It's not a difference in degree, it's a difference in kind almost. Like, if I see something that looks good, your website looks good, right? Like, I see that, but I've seen other good looking websites. So it may be a little bit better, a little bit worse. But if you give me information that fundamentally transforms the way that I see things, and I get this stuff does come across into my world, but as a ratio of the amount of content I consume and those nuggets that fundamentally change the way I see something, it's a very, very small ratio. But I remember them for a long time, and I seek them out, and I do business with them, and I partner with them, and I work with them, and I know, Stephen, this, I'm just telling you stuff you already know, you've thought about this, but I really want the listeners to take this in now. To be practical, again, what you described being so hard and taking a lot of time, I would also caution against people saying, well, if I can't create some mind-altering substance of an article or a video, then I shouldn't do anything, right? But I do think that if you're going to claim to be a thought leader, that better be what you're doing. Otherwise, just own what it is that you're doing and say, look, we're trying to put out helpful stuff, and it's got our own spin on it, it's got our own voice, and it's got our own perspective. But that's my long-winded plea of, don't call yourself a thought leader unless you're doing that, unless you're the LSD of content.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I'm totally diseased because in 2008, 2009, I was writing for Deloitte.
Okay.
And as a writer for, one of the leading, for one of the big four, there's a whole new level of expectation. Like, the words that you throw together have to change a mindset, or they look at you like you're the last kid to get picked on the the middle school kickball team. Like, you're and nobody wants to be there. So your level of writing isn't thought leadership, it's eminence. Like, we're shooting for writing stuff that not only changes people's mind or mindset, but they don't know their mindset's really being changed. And that's one of the sort of the magical mechanics of really astounding writing, or really astounding content. Like, content that's so stealth, it changes your mindset, and it plants that kind of brand bomb in a time release format in someone's head, so that in 6 months, when they are making a decision about something, they remember, like, oh yeah, that's right, these are clearly the smartest people on the planet. Like, I need to go with them. See, that's some stealth shit right there. That is, they were doing it so many years ago, like, figuring this stuff out. I was super fortunate to be on a team where I saw the wizard, standing there mixing his his magic potion, and I just paid attention, and I thought, okay, so if you want to do this, like, CX pilots, let's just be real. Like, we're one of the smaller CX consultants. We're focused on professional services. We're all, we're all smart. We're all doing essentially the same things. If you want to rise above in this arena, like, you have to make some really hard decisions. Like, I'm not typically the person that goes out to, I might not be the person the first face you see at CX pilots. I'm really focused on, like, how can we create our brand? How can we make sure that that we truly are saying things and pointing to things and helping people understand concepts that will fundamentally change their business and help them adapt. We call those relationship design tools, and it works. I mean, it's something that I focus on. I don't know anybody else who spent 6 months deconstructing, the process to map a genome and then tried to apply it to business. But I did that to help me understand, like, what are all the complex theoreticals that go into, like, fundamentally changing an industry. And I wanted to figure it out. I wanted to map it thoroughly. And we've been able to do that. We apply it to our clients' businesses, and it's pretty remarkable.
That is remarkable, Stephen. This conversation, I am really struggling the fact that I have to end this one because there's so many questions that come to mind, or just there's so many other ways that I'd like to look at these problems that I imagine you've thought of, 100 times over. I'd really love to continue this conversation on another, perhaps a part 2 sometime. But I want to be mindful of your time and the time of our listeners and our viewers. So between now and when we can hopefully have that next conversation, how can people learn more about you guys, and how can they get in touch with you?
They go to cxpilots.com. CX Pilots, your pilots is a double entendre. We're people that fly you through the sky and get you to point B safely. But we're also a modular-based approach to consulting. So we do individual pilots for organizations. So that's what pilots means. Just read some of our stuff. Like, we have maybe 100 or more fairly interesting articles where we're actually trying to put our money where our mouth is and change people's minds. Readers have to be the judge of that. But cxpilots.com is probably the best place to start.
Okay, and I'll drop the link in the comments, guys, so you don't have to go pecking that out on your keyboard. I will drop it in there. And also, I always offer this, folks, if you want to get in touch with Stephen and you don't know how, or you missed that and you missed the link, send me a message on Facebook and I will put you guys in touch. Stephen, this has been a phenomenal conversation. It's been really eye-opening in a lot of ways. I appreciate your how you kind of expand one's I guess I'm even struggling how to say this. I feel like I'm looking at things very differently because of this conversation. And I think that's what you wanted to happen. I think that's what
awesome.
You mind bended me into that. So I want to say thank you for that. And thank you for taking the time to come on today. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. If you got some value out of this, drop a comment. Let me know what you thought. And if you just want to make fun of me, drop a comment anyway. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you watching. Until next